Hey legends, what an episode we have for you today. Zach Tuohy joins us, formerly a Geelong Cats player and also from Carlton, recently retired AFL footballer. Zach's journey is incredible. He started off in Ireland as a Gaelic footballer, came all the way to Australia, and you look back in his career now, it's hard to believe that he had the transition from an Irishman playing a different sport into the AFL with just under 300 games, a premiership, and playing for some great clubs like Geelong and Carlton. There was a lot in this from his on-field life and his off-field life, and the Irish humour. You can't beat it. I hope you guys will enjoy this one. Let's get into it. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, another episode of the Unlaced podcast. As I always say, if you are new here, thank you for turning up. And if you've come back again, I absolutely love you. If you are listening on Spotify, you've tuned into an episode before, guys, I'm going to pause you there. Go to the 5-star rating, hit 5 stars, why not? But please get those numbers up because we are trying to grow the podcast. We've had some big episodes over the last few weeks. A very, very inspirational one last week as well with Paul Taylor. If you guys are interested in the brain and performance. I mean, he's a neuroscientist, he's ex-military. He went through a whole range of stuff around performance and kind of going against a lot of what westernized medicine and advice is actually like for well-being, which was really interesting, but hard to not agree with what he said as well. So go check that one out. This one's going to be awesome because I feel like we've had a podcast before the podcast talking about my sport, soccer, but this man is known for playing a sport that actually has the ball, shaped as a soccer ball, but kind of moves very differently and then graced the fields of the AFL. So if you know my language already, we've got a premiership player from Geelong, Zach Tuohy, on the show.
Man, thanks for having me. This is exciting. I enjoyed the pre-podcast we just did.
I know. Is this podcast going to be worse than the pre-podcast? we were talking about a lot of football, but we're kind of my heritage is from probably obviously not far from where you're from. So
yeah, well, it's what I actually wanted to be a professional soccer player growing up. Realised pretty early I wasn't good enough. And yeah, I went towards Gaelic football, but I still love Premier League, big Liverpool fan, my whole family are Liverpool fans, so it's always been my passion.
Wow.
Yeah.
So where does like from a junior player kind of upbringing, where does the percentage stand on like players that go into Gaelic and players that go into, the soccer as such?
Yeah, it's a good question. So back home, I guess the big sports are Gaelic football and hurling, which is the other like Gaelic sport. Yeah. Wild if you haven't seen it before. And then soccer. Even soccer participation-wise would probably be the next cab off the rank. It's really, if you're not going to play rugby, it's the only pathway to professional ball sport in Ireland. There's not really basketball pathways to. There's no real other major sports that lend itself to a professional lifestyle. So for me, it was always soccer, and Gaelic football is what I was best at. But I love playing soccer. It was the most enjoyable sport to play growing up. And the sad reality is, at least back home, might be a bit different here, is that if you're not professional when you're 14, you're not going to make it, which is mad, really. But that's just the name of the game. So.
Well, there's a lot of young Irish kids that they may even be based in around Ireland, but they're playing for academies in England, or they're moving to England young to sort of base themselves there. It's pretty
and there's like there is feeder clubs in Ireland.
Is that right?
Yeah, so you can like play representative kind of soccer up in Dublin, and scouts won't look at the rest of Ireland. They just go to these one or two clubs that are feeder clubs. So if you can't get into one of them when you're 13, 14, 15, it's too hard. Now, it happens. Occasionally, players get pulled from the League of Ireland, but it was never really going to happen for me, but I do love it. Yeah,
I think you'll have the best answer for this, but every time I've been on travels and I've run into the Irish, it's like we're with an Australian. Just because I don't, maybe they're as crazy as us, or they're as loud as us, or their banter is just like on a whole nother level. Even like females, their banter, they're putting like me and my mates on the back foot with thoughts and just words that they say. But why is that? Did you find that at all when you came to Australia? It was quite an easy fit for you?
Yeah, I think culturally we're extremely similar. I think both pretty sports obsessed. Yeah. I do think the humour translates really well. The language is the same, although it's sometimes hard to touch and go sometimes. But I found the transition really easy. Yeah. I slipped straight in with like my teammates who were my age. There didn't seem to be any knocking heads or not really understanding each other's vibes. So I think that's probably another reason you see so many Irish people over here. It's like basically Ireland, just with nicer weather. Like.
It's hard if you come from, I feel, anywhere in the UK and you step foot in Australia to leave. Yeah. Just from a climate point of view. I mean, I love the UK, but...
Yeah. Like, I love it back home and all the sports is great and I miss it. But, like, Australia it's a wicked country, man.
Yeah.
And, like, it's sort of one of them... like I think Irish people sort of are guilty of doing this, that when it's your own backyard and you grow up there, you maybe don't appreciate it. So for me, like having been away, I'm obsessed with Ireland. But at the time I was kind of like, oh, this is fine. Yeah. And you want to go somewhere else. And I sometimes think Aussies feel like that about here. And it's not till you leave that you realise how wicked it is. So I love Ireland. I think it's just the most beautiful country in the world. But I'm obsessed with life here. Yeah. I just think Melbourne especially is just, it's a sporting hub. Like if you're into your sports, there's really nowhere better.
It's amazing. Yeah. Well, I've actually never been to Ireland. I've been to Scotland. I've been to England. I feel like where's best to go? Dublin?
Well, you fly into Dublin and do that for a night or two, say you've done it, but get out of Dublin as quickly as you can.
Really? Why?
Just get out of it. It's just, like the whole west coast of Ireland is beautiful. That's where the real kind of Irish experience is. Lots of like the traditional little pubs that everyone maybe thinks of when they think of Irish pubs. Like it's the most unbelievable countryside. It actually reminds me a bit of New Zealand. I'm not sure if you travel up and down New Zealand. It really reminds me of that. The
greenery kind of.
And if you imagine where Ireland is geographically, we're kind of the first country the Atlantic hits. So you get these beautiful coastlines. And, all through the Midlands where I'm from is just beautiful countryside. So do Dublin, do the Guinness factory, say you've done it and then get out.
Okay. Well, I also think something about Ireland that amazes me as well, and similar to Australia. Australia, I feel like we've got a quite small populated country, but I think we overachieve with like our global celebrities. Ireland is well and truly in that category for like a small place. Literally, Bono from U2, Conor McGregor. I wrote some down. Pierce Brosnan, Cillian Murphy, Roy Keane, Colin Farrell, Zach Tuohy.
Big Reg, top of the list.
I could not believe the amount of people that have come out, like global superstars.
Yeah, there's a few things that Ireland has kind of always been like pretty good at for our size. Don't know what this says about us, but we've always had world-class fighters.
Yes.
Don't know what that says about us as people.
Yeah.
Like our rugby team's always been, the union always been really competitive at the very top level, and actors and musicians, so that kind of performance side. So Ireland culturally, like if you do get to Ireland for a little period of time, like we're just extremely, I'm not, but we are as people extremely musical. So the performance side doesn't surprise me at all, that we have some good actors and great bands.
That's incredible. Just to get a kind of capture of you as a person as well before you came to Australia. I mean, what is like the upbringing like in Ireland? Because you've got kids, young kids now. You're growing up in obviously Australia.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there'd be difference, right, to what you had versus here.
Yeah, a little bit. Like, I was the youngest of 4, 2 boys and 2 girls. I was kind of the only one that played sport. My sisters played a little bit of basketball, but I've always just been sports mad. My brother's more of a musician than a sports person. We all love sport, as in the whole family's big Liverpool fans, like we touched on, and we've always gone to like the football locally. But I was just obsessed with it, and I talk a lot in the book about like my old man was a jailer. He was a prison officer for 30 years in Portlaoise Prison, which is a maximum security prison in Portlaoise. It's where all the heavy hitters go. Ireland's had troubles historically, especially up north, and all the heavy hitters from those times ended up in Portlaoise Prison, and I just never really appreciated it. So I was always kind of sheltered from that, and then like footy was just a priority. And even from like my parents' point of view, my mother always jokes that my old man prioritised sport over school, and he's probably not wrong. Now it worked out great, risky strategy to take. But I just had like a brilliant upbringing in a really sporty town. Like I was just extremely. Your
old man was a prison officer?
Prison officer, Portlaoise Prison. And it's, so Portlaoise, it's kind of best known for its prison. It's been around for 100 and...
known for its prison.
It's been around forever. So Portlaoise, the town, has expanded around it. But this was always like one of the big couple of prisons in Ireland. And it's like one of those things you grow up with it. I just don't really think about it. And it's only now writing the book, asking my parents for stories. That's like, geez, that's pretty extreme. Like,
well, it's probably a good point to raise as well for a lot of people at home. We're obviously going to go through Zach's career from a Gaelic football point of view and also his AFL career. The Gaelic stuff I can't wait to talk about because it's got to be a fascinating sport for Australians watching it, and probably vice versa for Irish watching the AFL, just with the discrepancies and similarities as such. But maybe just to get straight into it, you wrote a book, The Irish Experiment, which sums up quite a bit around your career and sort of what you've been able to achieve, which is quite remarkable. But I was just wanted to jump on that and think, I guess, how difficult is that? Even though you've lived a life and you know the story, to actually construct it.
Yeah, it's actually, it's pretty confronting.
Yeah.
So I had to be talked into doing a book. This wasn't something that I was kind of,
Really?
I just, for a few reasons. One, I kind of feel like doing books is reserved for the big dogs. And I'm not sure I see myself quite on the level of most blokes who write autobiographies.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the first hurdle to get over. And then in my mind, when I glance back, I just kind of think for the most part, I've had such a great like life and career and as in enjoyable and privileged. And I was just like, I'm not sure how much stories I can pull from it. And then I sat down to write it and it was like, Jesus, we've had to actually cut stories. Yeah, like it was. And for me, as somebody who's I quite enjoy talking about my career and even the ups and downs. I'm happy doing that on this platform. But when times are really tough for me, I never spoke to anyone about it. And all of a sudden I'm writing all this stuff in a book that, you know, my partner doesn't even know. And really? About when I was really struggling, you know, the year I had my first kid, you know, I was early in my career trying to get settled here and I was extremely homesick and I just didn't handle it great. And it was only when I was writing this book that I was like, geez, looking back and I'm pretty sure I probably had some type of, you know, postpartum. Yeah. You know, you don't hear about dads getting it, but I think it's pretty rampant.
It is, right? There is such thing to that.
Yeah.
I mean, not that I would know, but I've read about this as well because people they kind of half laugh at it and then like people go, no, it's a real thing.
It's a very real thing. And obviously it's like, look, it's physically, it's tougher obviously for the mothers and they go through so much. And I'm really lucky my partner was like as strong and capable and kind of independent as she was. But like looking back on it, I'm pretty sure I had it pretty bad.
Oh, man.
And it's nice to kind of write it out because one thing that got me over the line about writing this book is that I can use it as a bit of a how-to manual for my two boys. So I've got a 5 and a 10-year-old now. They're not going to read this for 10 or 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
But I would hope that at some point in their life, if they're feeling stuff like what I was feeling, that they could read it and learn what not to do. Because I don't think I handled it great, but I want them to know that, you know, I tried it this way and it's probably not the best because I would hate for them to end up like me in that regard.
Yeah. Well, that's actually an interesting point. Imagine having like a book from your dad that you could read that almost you just go through, you're like, oh.
Well, yeah, that's how I got talked around. Yeah. That it would be something, because from my point of view, I always think, again, talking about my dad and his career in the prison service, and he left the prison service and went into politics, and you know he's fallen ill later in his life. He's got Parkinson's, so like it's an incredible story. Now it might not be of interest to the wider community, but I know if I had that book, I would be fascinated by it. So that kind of won me over in terms of writing the book and let my kids see really what my career was like.
What was probably the most either, I guess, surprising aspect of what you did? Or was it also, the most surprising thing you did, but also probably the most fulfilling now you look back on the process of actually completing the book?
Yeah, it's nice. So a lot of this stuff, it's nice to have gotten it out. Like I said, I really enjoy talking about like football and just even sport, but I like kind of analysing the game, and I always think it's fun to exchange stories with people who, you know, are in different life paths than mine. But to actually get some of that less comfortable stuff out feels really good now. Shock, I think you're meant to talk about your feelings.
Yeah.
So to get some of that off my chest after, I mean, that was 10 years ago. Some of the really tough stuff was 10 years ago. And I've just kind of sat on it for that whole time. And so we wrote all the chapters and I was going over it, rereading them and like, you know, making little edits here and there. And that particular chapter I was talking about, the year my son was first born, I was kind of reading it back on, like, this is only a few weeks ago. The book's printed last week. And I was thinking, my wife still hasn't read this. And there's stuff in there that I'm like, and I think she probably suspected at the time that, you know, I was struggling with it. So I kind of handed it to her and I said, look, you're going to want to read this before the rest of the world.
Oh, wow.
And she was reading it and she was on the couch next to me and she was giggling at the start because I talk about how we met at like a seedy nightclub and, you know, she's kind of chuckling away and then I could see her get a little bit more somber as she was reading like the chapter and I knew what bit she was at. And she, at the end, she just kind of puts it down and like crawls on me like a Labrador and just gives me a big hug. And she's like, you know, you can talk to me. And I always have known that. But it was nice. Like, it was nice to get it out there. And it's probably helpful, like, for blokes, I hope, to read it. I don't know if I'm perceived as particularly tough, but I do played a tough sport for a long time. And there's a kind of persona that comes along with that. And I think on field, that's fine. But, like, blokes aren't great at handling some types of adversity.
Well, it was that adversity in your life, actually kind of revisiting that in the book, was that a healing and helpful process, or was that also confronting as fuck?
That was therapy. It actually kind of acted as therapy. And I'm in a really good place in my life now, and there's far more good than bad, but like I said, it felt nice to kind of get it off my chest, and it was confronting to do it. And even then it was kind of like, do I really want to share? Like, do people need to know that? Like, there's one anecdote in the book in particular. We played St Kilda on a Monday night. So I'm not sure why they put it on the Monday night, but it was on a Monday night.
Because you were playing St Kilda.
Yeah, true. And we weren't going great. So
sorry, Saints.
On just after home and away. And we were playing St Kilda on the Monday night, and I was just like full Carlton gear, ready to go bag, and I was in the living room and just lost it. Like, nothing had happened. There was nothing. We never fight, me and my partner. So like everything was good, and just lost it. And we had Mick as coach at the time. Now, Mick was polarising, but I actually had a great relationship with him. And I knew if I called Mick and said, I could have even said I was sick, but if I just said, look, mate, I'm feeling terrible, he would have been fine. But my kind of overarching philosophy is that if you're capable of playing, you should just play. And because I was physically capable, I went and played, and I think I played okay, but I can remember being in the rooms pre-game thinking, I don't know if my eyes are still bloodshot or if they're still watery or whatever. Nobody picked up on it, and I think I played okay. We won the game, but I was only looking back on it now. I'm like, I don't think that's ideal prep.
Wow.
I'm not sure you're meant to be bawling your eyes out in the living room before you go and play an NFL game. So that's the kind of stuff that maybe happens that people just aren't privy to.
Can you explain maybe just the actual, I guess, kind of what you went through in that period, just to give some acknowledgement to the battle of also the modern day athlete that deal with sort of these humane things that probably aren't either spoken about or exposed, but you're still judged on the weekend for how you play.
Yeah. And look, I don't expect the general public to like, oh, he played terrible, but maybe he's really upset. Like,
that never happens, right?
Yeah, like they can only judge on what they see, so I do get that. And the criticism is fine. I think where it gets a little bit hard for people when they're in that phase is when the criticism is personal. Now, I've been always okay at dealing with that, but I can imagine it happening to someone else who maybe didn't quite have as thick a skin as I did. And it tested me at times. It's not like it was always just water off a duck's back. But I can very easily imagine being in that mindset, playing poorly, and then having an inbox full of ats calling you, whatever it is they call you. So I just think that's where it gets a bit grey. Yeah. And the criticism is fine. I can live with it. That's kind of what you sign up for.
Yeah.
It's just when it starts getting a little bit personal, if you're in that headspace, that's when it can really push people to a dark place.
Well, this is what I tell people. Like, the difference between now and back then is that people can contact the player.
Yeah. Everybody's accessible.
You'd hear it in the stands and people say this and there'd be threats and the media would write stuff. Now people can actually contact the person.
Gets into their living room,
or
gets into their phone.
Give them a notification. And I'm like, that is where it's getting quite interpersonal with if real stuff is going on, then you've got that. It's like, whoa, it's a lot.
And again, like, look, I don't really know what would possess somebody to like at someone just to abuse them. Now, I get everybody's passionate and, that can sometimes spill over, but like, tell your mates that you think I'm a dickhead. You don't need to tell me like. So it's what you say. It's the good outweighs the bad, but the bad can be frustrating. Yeah,
they definitely can. Well, just to go, actually, where can people get your book?
All good bookstores will be out officially on the 4th, but it'll start finding it in bookstores on the 1st of November onwards.
Beautiful. I think we might be able to have a link attached to it to help people get to it and drive to it. But well, kind of to go into what's going to be in the book is obviously what I want to get into before you came to Australia and experience the AFL world, which is going to be fascinating just to hear how all the dots connected there. But the Gaelic football side, you're always naturally quite gifted at that. Can you give us a background to, I guess, how your Gaelic football career started? And probably for some of the listeners, actually how big Gaelic football is in Ireland, because some of these games get some huge attendances.
Yeah. So played from as young as I can remember, a bit like Auskick, I guess, like just always played. It was probably the sport I excelled at most. But genuinely, I think soccer is what I found most enjoyable. I never remember being anxious before a game of soccer. I was always nervous before Gaelic football. Don't know why.
Really?
Don't know why. I was always the way.
Is that because you can kind of like there's more physicality, or there's more variance to the game?
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if maybe I was perceived as being a better Gaelic footballer, so maybe there was like a performance anxiety to it. But yeah, so I played a bit of everything growing up: hurling, Gaelic football, and soccer. Kind of got to 14, 15 where you have to pick one because you just can't juggle all of them. And Gaelic football was what I was best at. And the prospects in Gaelic football are decent. You can't have a career, or you can't do it for a living. But, there's profile to be gained. And like you said, there's a handful of games every year we sell out, or the GAA sells out Croke Park, which is, I think it's the biggest amateur stadium in the world.
Is it
I think it's 86,000 or something like that now. And I actually think they have had much bigger crowds there than the 86.
I feel like I've seen 90, 100.
Yeah, there has been. Yeah, I'm not sure officially what the capacity is, but and they sell that out quite a few times. Like it's exactly like AFL in Melbourne. It's kind of an extreme passion. It's extremely parochial as well. It's the fun thing to travel around Ireland. You'll get these villages that have 150 people living in and they're just die hard for their village team. Like that's the be all and end all.
Life,
and it kind of grows outwards from there. But I loved it growing up and actually want to go back and play if I can. But
what was the team you played for?
Portlaoise is my club. So is my club, and then Laois is my county. So
Laois, right, makes sense. So what fascinates me, and you kind of touch on it there, is, and I want to kind of go into the difference of the two and also the connection of the two too. But essentially, that some of these, or majority, everyone it's not a full-time job. They get some sort of maybe bits and bobs, but some of them are going from the tool site to play at Croke Park in front of 86,000 people, which that's like crazy to me because they're just normal guys off the street that are superheroes in the night.
Yeah, like the expectation on these guys is frightening. I've gone back and watched them train, and even since I've left, like they are professional in every aspect except like the money side of it. These guys train. I just think it's quite silly what we're asking them to do, but they train every bit as hard as we do, every bit as often as well, really. I mean, they don't have access to the day-to-day facilities we would in the AFL, but they are training 2-3 times a week, weights a couple of times a week, and they can play for their club and county, so there's a couple of teams they're representing. It's effectively 12 months of the year. And they're all teachers and plumbers and builders, whatever it is they're doing day to day. And then go out and sell out Croke Park a handful of times a year.
From your point of view as well, I mean, what makes a great Gaelic football player?
Just in Gaelic football, or to make the transition?
Well, probably Gaelic football first, because I want to I'll build the dots to that. But that sport's still, I just find it incredible. I would like to think if I played that, I'd try and have the ball on the ground as much as possible. But I don't know if that...
As a soccer player coming out.
I don't know if that's a good idea, right? So,
well, it's it's kind of a similar skill set and body type that excels here. Obviously, there's a lot less tackling, but if you can be... like the best Gaelic footballers I ever played with are like guys who are disproportionately like athletic for their body size. So the big guys who are extremely speedy, because they can't be dragged down in the same way you can be dragged down here in the AFL. Like you could be massive, but if somebody gets a good grip on you, there's not much you can do. Whereas back home, you can shrug tackles, you can break tackles. Gotcha. They're exceptionally skillful. I think you could argue it's a more skillful game, although it's hard to kind of compare those two things. But you do tend to have to be really competent on both sides of your body, especially if you want to be one of the top guys in the forward half.
Right.
You need to be skillful on both sides. And then, that's typically the makeup of like the really elite guys, which is similar to here. I get like that's an amateur sport.
That is not an amateur sport.
It's crazy.
So
isn't it?
that essentially looks very much like a massive soccer stadium or football stadium.
It's kind of got I've always thought it's got a similar kind of design to Adelaide Oval. That's a terrace on one end. On the right of the screen, they're all standing.
Right, so
and everyone else is sitting,
Wow.
So it's hands down the best surface I've ever played on.
Really?
Oh, it's incredible. It's incredible.
So from a whole season basis, who's using this ground? Is that...
So it's the Gaelic...
so every football, like home?
Yeah, it is, and all the big games are played there. But we'll play soccer there, we'll play rugby there.
Right.
And that's money the GAA makes when those games are held there. But it's just like, it's a staggering venue.
Where does that compare with some of the stadiums you've experienced in Australia?
I've never gotten to play there in front of a packed house.
Oh, okay,
so that's the only thing that will kind of affected my... When I was
viewpoint.
When I was minor, which is under 18s, that's the comp back home I got drafted out of. we played our semi-final, so our prelim, as a curtain raiser to the seniors prelim. So by the time that game finished, we would have had 60 or 70. So that was the biggest I had experienced.
Okay.
But that place there is our MCG, and it's a really apt comparison because it's an indigenous sport, really unique to Ireland. Now, you can find it played in other places, just like you can find Aussie rules played abroad, but really it's only played in Ireland. In the same way AFL is really only played here. And that's kind of our holy ground for sport, just like the MCG is for footy or cricket or,
Well, that's a great segue into this because obviously you are talented enough to be recognised in the AFL, but at the same time, I know we've had some Irish greats and players that had paved the way probably prior to you coming, but still, how does a club the size of Carlton attract interest in a young Irish kid that's playing almost a different sport that holds some similarity, but a different sport?
Yeah, it's a bit of a risk, really. There's certainly no guarantee it's going to work out for them or for me, but that under-18 year was 2007 for me. And back home, you have to play with where you're from. There's no getting drafted elsewhere. And I'm from a pretty small county that's got some great sporting heritage, but being as small as we are, it's pretty hard to compete, against the bigger counties. Yeah. As it happens, my under-18 year, we just had an incredible team. We just had this batch coming through that were all just top players. Yeah. So we actually made it pretty far in the competition. And I talk a bit in the book about I scored probably the best goal I've ever scored in my career in the semi-final. Right. And the joke has always been amongst my mates that's all I did, and that's the goal that got me drafted, and and it was nice. I'm quite happy with that.
How did you score the goal? If you could walk me through it.
It was just a hero was needed. Yeah, we were actually down late. I played half back, and we were down late 4 points. So it's a goal is 3 points in GA, and a point is 1 point.
Yep.
So we were kind of getting to the stage where it had to be a goal or we just weren't going to get away back, and I was pushed forward, which is a fun role because you just get to disregard defending. And it actually I just got popped over the top to me running in on goal, and I just kind of kicked it as hard as I could and top bins. Quality. It was really nice. You can find it on YouTube. Everyone's up there somewhere. Not that I think you can. I haven't seen it. Yeah. But as it turns out, I've spoken to Jared Sholly, who was the scout that brought me out, and it was actually a point I'd scored a couple of weeks before. And he talks about, which actually remind a lot of the young Irish players when I'm back home, he said if that point was all I'd scored, that would have been enough. If I played terrible for the rest of the tournament, he still would have brought me to the combine. Because all the AFL clubs are really they're not looking for the finished article. You don't have to be physically built. You don't have to be look like your skills are ready to go. You just have to show the potential because they want somebody they can mold into the type of player they want. So he said when he saw this particular point I'd scored a few weeks ago, he said that was enough for him. He said they'll be able to work with that.
So would you say one of the things I think, because obviously naturally from a ball to hand and kicking kind of skill set, that's probably what's going to develop, and maybe just understanding the rules and things like that. But I feel you would come in with such a different viewpoint of space, awareness, little things that Gaelic and soccer would give you that potentially AFL doesn't naturally kind of build into the players as they're developing.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's a bit like, I don't know if you know this about Pendlebury, but he played basketball.
Yeah.
He said everybody game he plays. But there is something to the fact that you played a different sport and it gives you a slightly different perspective. There's one physical skill or attribute the Irish guys tend to have, and it's a byproduct of kicking round ball your whole life, and it's that across your body, flat, hard, kind of bullety kick. I think the Irish guys do it really well. Pierce Hanley was unbelievable at it.
Yeah.
Conor McKenna still has that kicking style. So that's something that's just a point of difference for the Irish guys.
Yeah.
And you don't want to coach that out of them. You don't want to turn them into the most perfect technical, traditional kick. You kind of want them to keep that bit of unorthodox, kicking action because it's unpredictable and they're capable of kind of mastering it. But yeah, the thing I found most challenging was not the skills, although it was a challenge, but picked them up pretty quick. It's a 360 game. The ground is so big.
Yeah.
The idea of having to be set up in a specific spot for every stoppage rattled me coming out.
Yeah.
I could not get my
head
around.
Is that because you were kind of that freedom role you had in Gaelic? Or is that because Gaelic, it's irrelevant?
Yeah, well, it's changed now, Gaelic football. But at the time, there's 15 on the field. You basically start in your position like you would be on a magnet on the board, and you don't really move a whole lot from there. Like you just kind of stay there. So it doesn't matter if the ball's high or back. Bit different now, but at the time it was really easy to play because you played in that area of the ground and that was kind of it. And I'm coming out here and they're talking like we had all these different calls for different positions around stoppages and I'm like, oh my hat. So eventually I got there, but that was easily the biggest challenge.
Hey guys, just a quick pause in this episode to compliment our partners of the show. You guys know that I've been sponsored and supported by Dabble, the gambling agency, for a while now. This place has a special place in my heart because it is like the social network of gambling. You can follow superstars of the game, copy their bets. You might not know so much about a certain sport, but you can copy someone who does and increase your chances of winning some money. Obviously, if you're not a gambler, please only bet what you can and are willing to lose. Please dabble safely, gamble responsibly, as we always say. Just so you guys know, this year I've been taking over the streaming space at Dabble every Wednesday night from 7 to 8 p.m. Jake's Take is live. It is the wild, wild west of streaming. There's not too many sporting agencies or gambling agencies out there doing what we do. We put on a few bets throughout the show. We get some guests on. We have a lot of fun. It's all within the Dabble app. If you guys want to jump on board, the link is in the bio. Let's get back into the episode. Can you just talk me through the process of becoming a Carlton player? Because despite you going to Geelong, you actually quite widely loved it, Carlton, and you played over 100 games there.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's that. Do people associated you being a over 100 game player with Carlton? Or is that quickly forgotten about?
No, I think,
to an extent.
I think it's been held on to. And fortunately for me, when I did leave Carlton, I think for the most part, I had a great relationship with the supporter base when I was there.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, they understood that it wasn't really my call. Like, I didn't really want to leave. Now, late in that last year, I was pretty desperate to get out, and you can sort of touch on that. But I ended up at Carlton, did the combine, was lucky enough to be picked out, actually came on a 2-week trial and hated it.
Really?
My first experience there, I really hated it. And that was like tough because at the time, like I said, I grew up wanting to be a professional sports person. Yeah. Now, I didn't envisage it would be AFL, but when that opportunity came, I was like all over it. So when I came out for 2 weeks and hated it, I was a bit like, oh, this is not how it was meant to be.
The game?
No, so I came at the end of 2008, I think. And it was in the middle of the season here. I actually think I left the day Buddy kicked his 100th goal against Carlton. Do you remember they stormed the ground? Yeah, that's the day I flew out. So it was the 2 weeks prior to that. And I was just kind of more or less dropped off at the club, ushered in and kind of left to my own devices. And I was pretty timid. And I was like, I just don't know what to do here. This is so embarrassing. So I left that going, oh God, that was meant to be better. Yeah. But I ended up signing on. And when I came back as a player, I loved it.
Really?
I loved it, yeah. So, and it was a great place to work, like a big club, huge supporter base. And at the time, the Carltons obviously had a tough period in the teens. But in that sort of 9, 10, 11, we're trending the right way. Yeah. So I was kind of thinking, looking at the list at the time, I was like, in 3 or 4 years, we should be really competing at the top. And 3 or 4 years gives me a good chance to develop and maybe I'll be in the team and could win a flag and all these things. And the wheels fell off a little bit, but but I did love it, yeah. And I think because Carlton supporters know how much I loved it there, they've kind of not given up on me.
It's a great way to get acclimated to a new city, just playing for like a top 4 club. Like you would have just rolled in. Melbourne's great.
Oh, peacocking around the place, like carrying suitcases everywhere.
My second home's the MCG. Yeah. Like ridiculous, right?
Yeah, that's the office. 9 to 5.
Some of us young guys that have lived here our whole life never stepped foot on it. They just come straight in every second week.
Man, I was so lucky the way it panned out, and it was an incredible place to work. Yeah, I was there 7 years. And for 6 years, it was great.
Well, true. We'll go into that, but I just want to get through the initial period and the transition, and you kind of touched on it a little bit. But from a teammate point of view and a player point of view, who were some? And this might be an obvious answer for the Carlton fans listening, but who were some of those players that obviously you had your talents and you were building your ability in the AFL, but some of those guys you had at the elite end of the game that were playing for Carlton at the time too. That who were those guys that you just were kind of in awe of or in shock of or gave you that motivation of like, this is the level you want to get to?
Yeah, there's a few. So obviously Juddy was there kind of at the peak of his powers. Like I was there when he won the Brownlow.
Right.
And Juddy, for somebody who was he was the biggest name in the game, really. Just the most like down-to-earth guy.
Yeah.
And like bearing in mind, I'm coming in pretty much as bottom of the tree as you can get. Like he'd never kicked the ball, much less played AFL. And he always gave me time. And I used to love that about him. But the guy I used to always lean on when things weren't going great or I was struggling with some aspect was Heath Scotland.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Everyone remembers him, but he's a brilliant,
he's a great player.
Brilliant player. Yeah, brilliant player. Kick on both feet like nobody I've ever seen. He used to train on his left, like only kicking on his left. He'd take kick outs on his left. It was incredible. And he was quite an intimidating looking guy.
Yeah.
Like he kind of looked
rough around the edges.
He looked rough. So like when I was coming in, I was kind of like, who's this?
Yeah.
But he was brilliant for me. And like he'd always take, like we'd have, if I was playing average, which happened to be early, he'd be the one I'd go to and ask for advice, and actually ended up leaning on him again around that trade time. Even though I hadn't spoken to him in a year or two at that stage, I was still comfortable to give him a call and say, hey, can we catch up? So he was probably the biggest one. But like, another one would be Cade Simpson, who's like, a club legend. And I do feel that if Cade Simpson had kind of played a different club, maybe a club that was just more successful over that period, he would go down as one of the greats.
Yeah.
I mean, he's one of the greats.
If he was in a Hawthorn or Geelong type
and I know
thing,
there's ifs and buts, but I just think he was like that level and maybe doesn't get recognised for it just because it was a tough period in Carlton's history. But he is like, he's as good as they get.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So for you, when you came in, what from a positional standpoint? Because like you're a wonderful player to watch, particularly towards. I mean, at Carlton, obviously, but Geelong was something probably where I watched you a lot more just because of the success the club had, the team it had. It was ridiculous kind of for a period. And I always enjoyed watching you play, and particularly your type of role. It's funny you say that. We spoke of a sensitive topic before, but you with the mustache, you're actually quite a fierce-looking guy on the field.
Yeah. Until you get to know me.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, very light-hearted. But also like a lovely kick of the footy too, which is... I don't know if you associate that with a lot of the Irish that naturally come here, but
it's tough. Like, like I said, it was the aspect of the game I didn't struggle with most. And so my role at Carlton when I played there on field, I was typically the lockdown kind of small defender, like playing on your Cyrils and your Eddies and like Stephen Milne early. He was a nightmare. Yeah, like talk about going in the deep end. So that was kind of the role I had. And towards the end of my career at Carlton, I started like understanding the game well enough to find it 20 times a game and start impacting more offensively. And by the time I got to Geelong, it was kind of like, well, I actually think I'm ready to just try and like be the guy off halfback. You know, like every club kind of has one or two that are like the ball users. And that's kind of where I was heading to at Carlton until I left. And then when I got to Geelong, I was kind of like, well, these guys, they don't really know like my personality. They don't know that, you know, I maybe haven't always been that kind of guy. So I just decided to be that guy when I arrived, and it just worked. I feel like for an Irish guy coming to the AFL, it's got to be validating that you're an elite footballer if Geelong is interested in you. I mean, Geelong's always been, in my lifetime, I'd argue they've probably been the most successful team to watch. I'm about 31. Yeah. They're just in finals every year. Them, Sydney, maybe Hawthorn as well. But just the back end of Carlton, why did that sort of not work out? Yeah, it was strange. So Bowles came in that 2016 year. That was his first year. I think we were all really excited about him coming in because he was the Clarko, protege, and that's kind of what everybody wanted at the time. And he came in and he was a really good teacher of the game. Like, he really did understand it well. I found him extremely intense. I think most people did. Pretty hard to work with. And the way it felt to me is that our half-back line was Cade Simpson, Sam Docherty and myself. It was a pretty good half-back line. Sam Docherty exploded that year. That's when, he became him. Yeah, well, I think he was All-Australian. Maybe he was best and fairest that year. Should have been All-Australian, maybe. And he got his All-Australian the next year, I think. Yeah. Cade Simpson's a club legend, and then I was the other half-back. So it was pretty good, but I was quite clearly third fiddle in not just a player point of view, but he loved those two guys. Yeah. And me and him never clicked. And I found it a bit odd, but as the year went on, it was getting worse and worse in our relationship. I don't know if it was getting worse, but it just didn't improve. Right. And I was kind of thinking, this will steady the ship. I don't want to leave. I want to be a one-club player, do all those things. Yeah. And then it just deteriorated as the year went on. And by the time the season finished, it had just gotten to a point where a few things happened kind of with my contract. I had a really minor stipulation in the contract I wanted changed. And it was effectively a match payments contract they were offering me. Now, that's fine when you're starting out. But at the time, I hadn't missed a game in 4 seasons. I played every game for 4 years, 3 years or 4 years. So I'm 26 coming into my prime, and I just had a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old. So I was kind of like, look, I'll take less money overall, but can you just guarantee it? Because I've got a kid. And And then I was thinking that's like fine. And they just kind of wouldn't come to the party. And that was a bit of a red flag for me. And I remember talking to my manager, and it's like, why would they offer me match payments unless they think I'm not going to play every week?
Yeah.
Because it's a good way of saving money if you think a player's on the periphery. So I was kind of looking at it going, is that a red flag to you? And we were chatting about it. And yeah, just by the time the off-season rolled around and a couple other offers were on the table, I just had effectively no choice.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't budge on it. And I was getting, much longer contracts elsewhere, much more lucrative contracts elsewhere. But I didn't really want to leave. But I was just so convinced by the end of the year they wanted me gone.
Well, that's so interesting because it fascinates me with professional sport as well. And with the emotional intelligence that's there to have these honest conversations so you can just get the facts. Because I'd argue that Carlton would have been better off with you there. If you look at your career, I mean, it was like just from not someone having these like hidden conversations or giving you a bad deal, that was probably disrespectful to what you did. It's like, you've got no choice.
Yeah, and I was pretty cut by it. And I genuinely didn't want to leave right up until the very end where I was just like, and look, I think I had, of the players they may have considered moving on, I did have a little bit of currency in the market. I think they had their eyes on a couple of younger players from other clubs, and that's fine. And the thing is, if they had actually pulled me aside and said that, I would have cooperated. I wouldn't want to have left, but I like the club. I cared about the club enough to have gone, well, you're probably doing right by me by telling me you don't want me. So now I have time to like figure out where I can go. But it kind of just felt like they lowballed me to a point where I had to be the one to say I want to leave. And then they can kind of leverage the fact that I was the one leaving, to reflect well on them. Yeah. So that it left a sour taste in my mouth that last year. But looking back on it, it was like, thank God it played out the way it did, because the truth is it was the best career move I could have made.
Yeah. Was there anyone else other than Geelong at this point, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. There was, so North Melbourne came along early in the year.
Yeah.
And I've never been, or had never been courted by another club, so that was quite nice. Like they're like sending me flowers and stuff. That was, so that was a nice little ego boost, because the season was starting to go tits up for me at that stage. And then that was kind of it. And I actually left Melbourne to fly back to Ireland. And when I landed in Ireland, I'd missed calls off my manager, and he was saying Gold Coast have just come in pretty hard, with the longest contract offer on the most money by a mile.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, I didn't really want to go to Gold Coast, but I was kind of like, I have to consider it. Like, this is pretty silly for me anyway. And at the time, Lockie Henderson had gone to Geelong the year before me, and we're really good mates.
Yeah.
And I was sort of saying, I was thinking at this stage, if I have to leave, like, I want to go to Geelong. It's a one-club town. Like, they're always competitive. Like, at the time they had, Mackie, Domsey Lonergan, Boris Enright. So like
some of those legends were still involved.
Yeah. So those three guys were all playing, but Corey retired in the off season, and then Mackie and Lonergan. And I was kind of thinking, well, they're great, but they're going to have to replenish that part of the ground soon. And I'm pretty confident that the only reason I ended up at Geelong is because Boris retired, and I was with Hendo in Queenstown on a golf course. And he got his phone out. He knew that because me and him had been talking. And he got his phone out, and it was the GFC. Every club has like a players group message. Yeah. And it was a message from Corey Enright. And he was saying, lads, just letting you all know I've decided to retire. And he's a legend, and he's such a loss to the game. But the second I saw it, I was like fist pumping and stuff. I was like, it's like,
you're
Boris,
a chance.
I'm a chance. Yeah. And then a couple of weeks later, they got in touch and said they were interested. And kind of from that point on, I was like, it has to be them.
Wow.
Yeah, it has to be Geelong.
So is this bit, I mean, obviously the Lockie Henderson relationship's there, and you obviously know some of the values and the success of the club, but was there any conversations with anyone within the club as well that was like quite luring for you?
Yeah, not till later on. So after all this and Geelong had sort of said they were interested, I had a meeting with Steve Hawking and Wellesley. And I was like, sweating bullets going in. At this stage, I was like really keen to get there. And I was like, I want this to go well. And we met with them, and it was the usual questions. Why do you want to leave? Like, why did you want to come to Geelong? And the thing about Geelong and how it's run is it's kind of known amongst the rest of the players that we do things, it's not we anymore, but we do things pretty differently. And we're really well looked after as players. We get a lot of time off. We train really hard when we're there, but like we're kind of treated like adults, and for the most part we try and condense our days. We don't expect players to be in the club at 5 p.m. We don't expect them in at 7 a.m. Like, the day is as long as it needs to be. And with that, you get all the potential success, like the repeated entry into finals, the constantly looking for top 4 finishes. Like, you get all that stuff as well. So I was kind of like, if I have to leave, I might only have 4 or 5 years left. At the time, I was thinking, I was like, 4 or 5 years of playing for a club that probably, you can't guarantee it, but probably it's going to miss too many finals is like pretty appealing. Yeah. So I met with Scotty Wellesley and Hock, and it went really well. And Gold Coast, as I said, came late and kind of almost threw a spanner in the works. But I more or less said to my manager, I was like, look, if Geelong can give me a 4th year, I'll go to them. They were offering the least money out of the 3 clubs, but I was...
Really?
Yeah. So they were the least out of themselves, North and Gold Coast.
But that's still how set on Geelong you were.
Yeah. It wasn't really a money thing. Like, the money was relatively modest, but it was more about maybe feeling wanted.
Yeah. That's great.
It is. That's what I wasn't wanted where I was, and it was nice to have a couple of clubs keen on you.
Yeah, well, it is. Coach once told me, always go where you wanted, which is, common sense in some regards. You touched on it there probably from like a little bit about the Geelong culture, but obviously we hear so much about certain clubs, Sydney's, Hawthorns, Geelong's, particularly over the last 20, 30 years, where the culture is like, they're just always there. Or at least they have been for periods. Geelong definitely has maintained that. What was the biggest difference culturally? I know you touched on sort of a component there, but as a whole, say compared to Carlton when you came to Geelong.
Yeah, like look, for the most part, every club, they kind of train the same. Like the football side of it, there's only so many ways you can kind of skin a cat. Like, you train your style, your system. You do weights. Like, some clubs will have a heavier focus on. Like, some clubs love extra grappling sessions away from the club. That stuff's all kind of on the periphery. Culture is kind of one of those vague words that it's actually hard to pin down what people mean when they say it. Like, it's lovely to kind of bounce it around, but I've just always thought of it as like, so how do you feel rocking up on a Monday? How do you feel rocking up on a Monday after a win, which is usually pretty easy? And then how do you feel rocking up after a pretty devastating loss? I've never had trouble getting into the car and going to the club on a Monday. Yeah. Never, not once. And I think largely that's been driven by Scotty. I'm not sure what people's perception of him is. Like, it's very funny when the camera cuts to a coach in the box and he's going absolutely bunta. But like, that's just so not what he's like. And I've given Scotty so many reasons over the journey to like spray me. Like, I've played enough bad games and done enough dumb things where if he pulled me aside, I would be like, yeah, it's probably fair enough, and he just refuses to do it. He just doesn't do it at all.
So he's not a shouter?
He's not a shouter at all.
Yeah.
The best advice you could ever give to a coach, in my experience, is that they should never forget how hard it was to play. So you can watch a game and, like, looking on from the stands, it's like, has he done that? Has he missed that kick? Or you can watch it and go, we literally did this drill in training. We talked about this structure in training and he's messed it up straight away. It's very easy to fall into that, like, how has he done that mindset?
Yeah.
He just doesn't.
He
awesome. Just doesn't. And there's been enough opportunities for him to do it. And because of that, you end up like just not being anxious going to work. You're not worried about a review highlighting you and saying, why are you doing this? It's just a good place to go to work.
So from that point of view, I mean, that sort of mindset with the coach looking and kind of actually coaching versus pointing fingers, that helped get the best out of you in regards to your career? Because I feel like you definitely did.
Yeah, look, I think I clearly played my best footy at Geelong. I think I was trending that direction when I went, so that probably helped. Correct. But I clearly played my best football there. And there's one example we lost in my first year at Geelong. We lost 3 games in a row, I think, which Geelong hadn't done in a good number of years at the time. And we played Essendon at the MCG, and I think we laid 31 tackles for the game, or like it was a pathetic effort, like. And we lost by whatever we lost by. And he called us in for a meeting after the game. And I remember thinking, this is it. Like, this has to be it. Like, that was pathetic. Like, this has to be the finger pointing. And he brought us in. And he literally just said, like, lads, is there something we can do differently? Or is there a change we can make in our schedule? Like, because, his thing is that they work for us. It was never the other way around. And that was it. It was just like a collaboration. And I was sitting there going, what is this? Like, I've never had this before. We lost 3 in a row, and that was pathetic. The next week we played the Doggies, who were reigning premiers at the time in Geelong. We laid a club record 134 tackles. So for me, I was looking at it going, anytime we've ever dished up what we dished up last week, we've been wrestling on the beach afterwards as punishment. He just walked in, asked for advice on ways he could coach better or the coaching group could treat us better. And the next week, that's the response. So that for me was 7 or 8 weeks into my Geelong career. I was like, okay, things are done differently.
I think everyone's got him wrong then, to an extent. Because
he is, mate, you
that's
you
a
would
lot
be
of empathy.
so impressed. You would be so impressed if you saw how calm he is.
Yeah.
Genuinely, the only time he raises his voice is like motivation.
Yeah, okay.
He's a big teddy.
Yeah, that's what
And then I've always played my best as a result. There's no anxiety, so that's why.
No doubt. And also, can I just get the insight of being a part of that dressing room and being a part of just some of the legends of the game, really? When you go through the spine of the team, through the time you were there, Hawkins, Selwood, you mentioned a couple of players already, but Dangerfield, Cameron in your later years.
Yeah. Yeah, there's been a few. Harry Taylor was a big one.
Harry Taylor too.
I think he's one.
Tom Stewart.
Stewie came to the club same year as me. Yeah, Harry's a good one. Harry is a culture setter. He is
Really?
Yeah. When you talk about somebody who just raises everybody's level, it's Harry Taylor's the one. And I think he's done a bit of work in the leadership space. I think he may have even done a bit of work with the Eagles. He's a Geraldton boy. He's from over that way. But he's a culture setter. Like, if there's a club out there looking to bring in a former player and they just want everything raised, go and get Harry Taylor. He's an absolute unicorn. He's a weirdo. But
out of all the players that we just mentioned, Harry Taylor's the one that...
He's the one that springs to mind. Probably because he's really strange in his training habits. Like, he does the weirdest things ever, and some of them are just
like,
daft.
What does he do?
Oh, like, he'll go in and he does a lot of body work with the boxing bag in the gym, but he'll literally, he'll be doing his bench press, and then he'll get up and walk over to the boxing bag, and he'll start, beating it with his wrists and stuff, because it's all the body work that he likes doing. He had me doing some marking drills. I've always struggled a little bit overhead. I don't read it as well as other players. Just been a part of my game I've always had to work on.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed doing these drills. But he had these ones where he would get tennis balls, or it could be anything. It could be like a badminton shuttlecock thing. It could be anything. But you hit it up in the air as hard as you can. And just when you mark it, you had to be either on your knees or lying on your back on the ground. So you'd run around, get on your knees and catch it. Or you'd run around, fall on your back and catch it. And he just invented this. And he does this all the time. But his reasoning was that, because you're on the ground, once you're on the ground, you can't really move. So you have to pick the flight early. And by the time your knees are on the ground, it has to be within reaching distance. So it's get on your knees as quick as you can. And if you've picked the wrong spot, you won't grab the ball.
Some like Mr. Miyagi
it's
kind of
weird,
stuff,
man. Yeah.
Like,
so I think he's really quirky in that sense.
Cool.
But he's a culture setter, and he's a standard setter. Joel, he's probably the best captain ever. I haven't played under every captain, but I struggle to see how anyone could be better.
What made him stand out? Leadership's always been associated with him, and we see his head get cut on field and all that sort of stuff. But what's behind the scenes?
Yeah, that's the least of it. So if you're to be a good leader, look, it's not the least of it. To be a good leader, you have to be able to perform on the weekend. I guess in that sense, it's the most important thing. But if 100% is Joel's workload, as captain and player, only 10% of that overall workload is the game. The work he does off field, and I'm talking from right up at the corporate top, just doing whatever the club asks him to in that way, right down to the first year rookie who needs a bit of advice. He is just, I don't know how he does it. As in, I don't know how his day is long enough. And even still, if I wanted advice, I'd call Joel. He'd pick up straight away, or he'd call you back a minute later and say, "What's up? What can I do?" And this is somebody who's already flat to the mat, getting pulled in every direction. I think the best leaders in any sport, but this is true of Joel, they tend to have a fascination more with other people than themselves. They have this kind of obsession about making other people better. I think they almost kind of they get off on building up the team, or they get off on the fact that I helped this guy develop. Juddy was the same, actually. Juddy did a lot of work with Crippa. I think Crippa would speak very highly of Juddy's impact on him as a player. But I just think it's a hallmark of great leaders.
This might be really hard for you to answer, but who was the best player you played with at Geelong?
Dangerfield.
Yeah, really? Paddy Dangerfield?
He's the best player I've ever played with.
Wow.
Yeah. I think he's a bit underrated, and I think people point to one or two kind of perceived flaws in his game. Like, well, he's not the best kick ever. He's a midfielder who's kicked 350 goals. It's pretty good going.
Yeah.
My first year at Geelong was the year Dusty won the Brownlow. Danger came. It was the year after Danger had won it. But that year from Danger is the best individual season I've ever seen.
Wow.
He was doing things. I was like, it doesn't make sense
his
to me.
Explosiveness too for his height
and he's never
stuff.
really lost it. He's maybe not quite at the peak of his powers, but you could easily look at a dozen games this year where he just took the game away from the opposition. And I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves. One, because he's active. I think that sometimes goes against players when you're talking about the greats, the all-time greats. We don't like to accept that you're kind of seeing it in front of you.
Correct.
Joel was exceptional, obviously, as well. I got Junior kind of on his return stint to the Cats, so probably didn't get him
Did
quite...
he come the same year as you?
Was it year after, I think.
After,
yeah, I think I had 1 year.
He ended up getting Andrew Mackey's number.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that's why. So I was thinking maybe he was there around the same time.
I think I had 1 year at Geelong without him, and then he came back.
Okay, right.
But so I kind of got him in the second stint, and he still had
with all the greats.
He still had the magic, but this probably wasn't the 45 and kick 5 every week junior. Yeah. So that might have changed it. Hawke, I think, however good you think Tom Hawkins is, I promise you, he's a fair bit better.
The longevity's kind of even proved that even more, right?
Silly how good he was.
Yeah.
But obviously, key forward, different type, and Tommy Stewart is edging his way into that conversation too. But no, for me, it's Danger. I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, from team success, obviously premierships, people talk about them, but actually winning one, was it better than you imagined? I mean, you absolutely bullied the Swans in a game. I actually think, I wanted to get your opinion of this. There was a game, I think it was the first final, you got Geelong just beat Collingwood.
Collingwood,
yeah. And then Collingwood just lost to Sydney.
Yeah.
I always wonder if Collingwood had won that game, what a great grand final we would have seen.
Yeah, because we played Collingwood earlier that year, and I think it was the same. I could be wrong about this. There was a year, I think it was that year, Collingwood were 25 or 30 points up, and we came back and just won by a goal or two. But even if it was a very close game, if it wasn't that specific one. In fact, I might play them twice in the home and away, but that qualifying final is the toughest game of my career.
Yes, so I got Geordie DeGoey, a couple of players all said the hardest game they ever played up until obviously last year probably, but was the qualifying final against Geelong.
The toughest game I've ever played.
They all said the same thing.
It was relentless, it was, and I don't know how they feel they played. I kind of feel like we didn't play our best, but it was just, and that's because of Collingwood now. That is they just didn't let us. I can remember watching Sydney Collingwood in the prelim, and I talk in my book a little bit about the anxiety I felt in 2020 going into the granny. I really wanted Port to win their prelim to come and play us. We'd already earned our spot, and I really wanted Port to knock Richmond off because I knew we could beat Richmond, but they did feel like the best team. Yeah. They'd lost their qualifying final as well, but I was kind of like, if they're on, they're really hard to beat. And I really liked our chances, or I preferred our chances against Port that year, despite the fact they'd beaten us in the qualifying. When I was watching Sydney and Collingwood, I was like, I really hope Sydney win this because Collingwood were such a tough team to play. Now, we'd beaten them a couple of times that year. I think we would have been warm favourites anyway. But I felt anxiety going into that Sydney game, not because Sydney weren't a great team. They'd already beaten us that year. They're an unbelievable team. Yeah. But at the time, it did feel like they'd arrived a little bit early. They had all the stars that they have now, but it kind of felt like that team was going to be unbelievable in a couple of years, like they were this year.
Yeah. So they just had Buddy, and then they had all these young players that were like
Errol Goulden and
Heaney,
Chad,
Papley.
Paps, So that all these guys, they're elite players, and they earned their spot. But I felt a bit of anxiety going in because I was thinking that if we don't win this one, it's bad. I don't think we'll ever get a better chance.
Right.
And again, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way at all, but we were coming off 15 wins in a row. We'd beaten Collingwood, who were flying at the time. Then we beaten Smack Brisbane in the prelim. So that's where my kind of anxiety had come from. But then the game itself was just, I don't know. I don't know how much of the flow state thing people are into. If that's a thing, that was it. I didn't really feel fatigued during the game. I always felt like we'd power on the ball. Everything went our way. Like every contest we won, and the second we broke them, it just felt like the game broke open.
Was it one of those grand finals as a player that was incredible to play in? A, because the sort of scoreline, but also B, because the heartbreak of going through sort of the other side of that in a sense? Or?
Yeah, the year before 2021, the prelim, that's the worst loss of my career. Yeah. I would take the 2020 grand final loss over that prelim every day of the week.
Really?
In my entire Geelong career, I've genuinely always felt like we could win it. Like, you kind of say that, but I was like, every year I was like, we're a really good chance.
Wow.
For a little period after that 2021 prelim, even I was a bit like, that could be it for the group. Or like for me, we'll say.
It just stung that much.
I would have retired. If I had to decide within a few hours of that game, if I was playing on, I would have said, no, that's it. I just couldn't do it anymore. Genuinely, the heartbreak was devastating. We got absolutely smacked. Like, it wasn't, we got, I don't know what 80-odd points in the end. It was like a proper humiliation. I remember punching the wall, walking in. Like, everybody was extremely somber walking in. I don't know how I didn't break my hand. Punching the wall, like I was screaming, carrying on like a pork chop. It was pretty embarrassing looking back. But at the time, that was it. Like, we can't. Wow. That could be it for the group. So then, to fast forward 12 months, it was the first MCG granny in, a couple of years.
Yeah.
And to then, like, halfway through the third quarter, knowing you could celebrate and just enjoy it was kind of like, man, it was...
It's just
terrible spectacle for the neutral, maybe, but I had a great time.
But as a player, that is the dream, right?
It's the dream. Yeah. Joel said it at 3/4 time, and I'm a pessimist at the best of times. I'm always like, they can come back here. But Joel more or less said at 3/4 time, goes, look, the game is over, but let's play the right way. I was like, okay, all right, skip. Game's over.
That's a great caption.
So and then for him to kick one, it was a perfect day.
Well, you spoke on this a little bit in your book, but calling it quits, really. Changing, obviously a career change, a life change. What was the decision-making behind that? Because probably people on the outside thought your ability and your footy was still on a level to keep going. Yeah,
which is was kind of the point. I've always said I didn't want to kind of flicker out. I didn't want to overstay my welcome. I think I'm really grateful that I've been allowed to play as long as I had, and I wanted to leave while I was still contributing. Now, I think if I'd played on, I think I could have contributed, but I do think I was running the risk next year of being that 1 year too long. I've struggled with my knee for since the end of 2018. I hurt it in a final against Melbourne, and it's really caused me trouble ever since.
Wow.
And, this is what we were talking about before the potty started. It was a criticism levelled at Brazilian player Casemiro for Man United, and big Liverpool fan, so I was looking at all the coverage from that game because we beaten United. But he got pretty roundly critiqued for saying this. So Jamie Carragher said that you should leave football before the football leaves you. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of wrestling with the decision at the time, and I was kind of like, that's kind of what I meant when I said I didn't want to flicker out. I don't want people to remember me limping to the line. And when I was making a list of reasons to play on, the one that kept jumping to the top was I can get to 300 games next year.
Yeah.
And I just kept having to catch myself.
What are you at, 280?
288. So I kept having to catch myself and go, why is like winning another premiership not at the top? Why when I think about playing on next year, why am I not thinking about we can win it again? And I do think Geelong are a good chance next year, but why am I not thinking you could be a 2-time premiership player? And the fact that my mind kept wandering to like, you could get this 300 game milestone. That was a major red flag for me. I've never done that in my career, and I genuinely couldn't stop my mind going there. And I was like, yeah. And I had a couple of conversations. Nigel Lappin is a coach. Obviously, he was a Brisbane,
legend.
Legend. I would take his advice now over anybody's, and I had a good chat with him. He talked to me about his retirement and how he made that decision, and he didn't push me in either direction. He kind of weighed up the pros and cons, and I more or less left that conversation and thought, yeah, I'm ready to finish.
So you're comfortable with where it stands, obviously.
And I still don't regret it, which I think is a good sign. Yeah. You hear players all the time who maybe a month or two later, and they're thinking, oh, I should have gone on. I'm really content. Yeah.
So what would be? I mean, now you obviously have a bit of time to enjoy what you've been able to achieve, spend time with family more. Maybe get back to Ireland, but from a career standpoint, is there anything you have your eye on, any connections of what you want to build, what you want to look into?
I've always enjoyed the media stuff. Like that's always kind of been where my passion has been outside of football. I love the podcasting world.
Maybe we do a Premier League podcast.
Mate, anytime. Do you know, I've thought about it. I was like, I really want to do it because I've got no one to talk to it about. Like all the lads in the club are kind of into it, but they're into it in like an FPL sort of way. I'm like, I just want to talk about
what's the ins and outs.
Yeah, so I'll be all for it. But,
I was telling my mates last night, they're like, man, Ten Hag's been sacked from Man U, and I was like, I was on YouTube watching Rio Ferdinand streaming live on the Bahamas or something. And he's going, Ten Hag's gone, man. He's like, Shovey's wife has posted a photo of her son in a Man United kit on Instagram. I'm sitting there going like, this is my life.
There's no one I can talk to about that stuff. And all my mates are United fans.
Oh, and Liverpool though. Liverpool look good, man.
Yeah, Liverpool do look good. So it's good. It's a good time to be getting into it. But
so media.
Love the media. I've always enjoyed it, and I do like covering the game. And then I've got a few other little business hobbies back home, but I'll probably be based here.
The Irish connection, obviously from the players coming into the AFL and that sort of growth, will that sort of always be something you'll do? I probably didn't reel off enough stats around that, but I mean, I think you're the second player to have ever won a premiership. Ty Canali was obviously a superstar of the game. Jim Steins. There's so many great names, but from a standpoint, you've cemented yourself as maybe someone that people can really look up to as say how possible it is.
It's kind of strange for me to think about it, like, because I mean, Jim is a level above. You know, he will always be the kind of greatest, certainly Irish player. But you know, of the rest, like Piers Hanley was a couple of years ahead of me, so he was always a good benchmark for me because he was like that few years more developed, that few years further ahead in games. So that was always a nice like bunny for me to chase, and hopefully I've helped the Irish guys I've played with and the girls. We've got 4 girls at the club now as well. So hopefully I've helped them, and then if I can help facilitate the Irish players either when they're here and be a sounding board for them to reach out to, that would give me great joy. And then even if I can facilitate players coming out, I would like to give them the opportunity I got. Although some people back home don't love the idea of me taking players out. It worked out well for me.
Oh, well, probably just a few quick fire ones for me is one was, do you remember a welcome to AFL moment? Because I feel like yours would probably, if anything stands out to you.
Yeah, there was a first goal was a big one, but there was another one that I copped a hit off Jay Schultz from when he played with Port.
Big boy Jay Schultz.
Yeah, and I found the vision somewhere because I was talking to someone about it. Really, I thought I'd broken a rib, but I can remember he was also on the ground. So I tried to jump up and jog off as though I was fine, but it was desperately painful. And that was kind of the first that's my first big hit.
Wow,
yeah,
nice.
Jay Schultz got me.
There you go. Hardest opponent you played on. You reeled off some absolute beauties when you first started out at Carlton, but who gave you the most difficulty across your career?
Dusty kicked the winner on me with the last kick of the game in one of the round ones in my early years, because I used to also get the resting mids, so the Dangerfields, the Martins, the Fifes. Junior played on Junior when he went forward.
Yeah.
And then of the traditional small forwards, Eddie, I played really well on Eddie most of the time, but then he kicks like 2 out nowhere.
Yeah.
And then Cyril was the one that gave me most anxiety. Yeah. But I think I did okay, but that was the most the sleepless nights going in was when you were playing on Cyril.
Who was the best player you ever saw live? I know you're big on Danger, but maybe we'll go outside.
Outside. Well, again, I saw Junior as a teammate later, but I also played on him at his peak.
Yeah, and Gold Coast days.
Yeah, that was silly. It was genuinely at a point. It was genuinely at a point where if you could keep him to 30-2, it was like, put him to sleep. That felt like you'd put him to sleep.
Yeah.
Buddy's the most unique. An athlete I've never seen like Buddy.
Yeah, brilliant. Most important thing that you look back on now that you adapted to well that allowed you to play AFL the way you did, given your background?
Yeah, I think most of what will help you is kind of the people you're around. Like, it's kind of a bit cliche, but I do think like the skills in that, it's hard not to progress on them because you do it every day. I think if you get tied up in the not right group, it's going to make it tough for you. I had a couple of Irish guys when I first went there, which really helped. And then I fell in with like Lockie Henderson early in my career, really good standards. Dennis Armfield, like Levi Casbolt, me and him got drafted together, 2 rookies.
Awesome.
Both still around 15 years later. Like it's Sam Doherty early, like good people. Yeah.
Beautiful. And then the last one we ask is, which you guys will know at home who always watch the show, is we test 3 key traits to success, people in business, sport, artists, whatever it may be. You need all 3: resilience, drive and ambition. But which one for you was a cornerstone for, really your Gaelic and AFL career, but more so your AFL career, I guess?
It's kind of hard to split a couple of them, I guess. But I would say, like, resilience now, having written the book, I might not have said this prior to writing it, but looking back at how often I was on the edge, like mentally,
really?
looking back at how often I was really struggling. I would probably pick that one. Like ambition would have been maybe the one I would have said early because, I always wanted to be a professional athlete. But I think I could have been a professional athlete without the level of resilience I've since shown. But I think my career would have ended a long time ago.
What was the biggest battle through that, just quickly? Was it the homesickness? So was that always the sort of circling cloud over you?
Yeah.
Or was there always different sort of things that kept popping up? Obviously, such a big change.
Yeah, homesickness itself was never really an issue until I had my first son. Like I said, I'm the youngest of four. All my family are still in my hometown. No one's left. We're all on each other's doorstep when needed. And then all of a sudden, I was like a young dad with no family around. My footy was like going downhill fast. Like my form that year was awful. And then I'm kind of trying to juggle life as a dad, not really knowing what I was doing. So I don't know if that's homesickness specifically, but it was just juggling being a dad with a sport that I was still coming to terms with. It was just really tough.
Well, if someone had told you before you came you'd have, 288 games, Geelong, Carlton, playing a couple of grand finals, win one. But anyone, could you?
I would have taken it. Yeah, I would have settled for it. It goes for the Irish guys. It goes one game, and then if you can get to 100, they're like almost the 2 milestones you want to tick off if you're an Irish player. I think that's pretty good going. Like getting into the league is impressive, and then 100. Satanto Halpin used to always say that's like almost the pinnacle for Irish guys.
Oh, then you've taken it too far, then, mate.
Yeah, I took it a bit too serious. So it worked out well.
Oh, well, congratulations on your career. Obviously, the book as well, The Irish Experiment, will be out. Everyone get your hands on it. Zach, mate, been awesome having a chat to you.
Loved it.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. We'll have to figure something out, chat Premier League again. Because
we
had a mini pod before we had a pod, guys, at home. But
devastated Ten Hag's gone, if anybody's wondering. As a Liverpool fan, I loved what he did for the league.
I love it. Well, congrats on a great career. Congrats on the book, mate. And thank you for coming on.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Guys, we'll see you next week.